And I don't think Hannah would want us to live that way.
But first, the family of a murder victim forgives the convicted killer as he learns his sentence in a Tucson courtroom. He was found guilty of murdering his girlfriend and killing her dog at their home. Today, a judge sentenced Taton Dorfman to 16 years in prison. But
Every 16 hours in America, a woman is shot and killed by an intimate partner. That's not a theoretical statistic. That's real women. Real lives, real families destroyed. On July 28, 2024, Hannah Marie Rogers became one of those statistics. But her killer did something that would shock even seasoned investigators. He FaceTimed his ex-girlfriend while lying next to Hannah's body and bragged about what he'd just done. Tonight, we investigate how modern technology captured confession in real time but couldn't save the 30-year-old woman who died just feet away. Hey investigators, welcome back to the crazycrimelures. If you're watching this video, you're someone who asks the hard questions. Why do people commit unthinkable acts? How do investigators piece together the truth? And most importantly, could tragedies like this have been prevented? I've spent years researching homicide cases and studying forensic psychology. My commitment is to tell these stories with the respect they deserve while helping us understand the warning signs that often appear before violence erupts. Every case involves real people, real families, and real grief. We're living in an age where technology connects us in ways our grandparents never imagined, but these same tools that bring us together can also document our darkest moments. Today, we're walking through this investigation together, examining evidence and analyzing psychology to understand how a seemingly quiet relationship ended in a murder so brazen that the killer documented it himself. Before we dive in, if you're new here, this channel is all about deep dive investigations into real cases. We don't sensationalize, we educate. Hit that subscribe button and join the investigation squad. Stick around until the end because I'm going to ask you a critical question about domestic violence warning signs that could save a life. Let's begin. Hannah Marie Rogers was 30 years old when her life was violently cut short. To those who knew her, she wasn't just a name in a police report. She was a light. Friends and family described Hannah as beautiful, smart, and funny. Someone who lit up rooms with a smile and was caring toward all life, always there for anyone in need of help. Hannah lived in Marana, Arizona, a growing community about 20 miles northwest of Tucson. It's the kind of place where neighbors know each other, where desert sunsets paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, where people move to escape the chaos of bigger cities. In July 2024, Hannah shared a home on West Mosquito Drive with her boyfriend, Taton Dorfman, and her beloved dog. Neighbors would later tell police they'd only lived there for 2 to 4 months, and described them as quiet neighbors who didn't make noise or have loud arguments. But here's what we know about domestic violence. Investigators, it doesn't always announce itself with screaming matches and broken dishes. Sometimes, the most dangerous relationships are the ones that appear calm on the surface. The ones where neighbors say we never heard anything. Hannah had a personality that those close to her described with words like sweet, caring, outgoing, and bubbly. She had the biggest heart. She was the kind of person who cared deeply about animals, which makes what happened to her beloved dog even more devastating. What we don't know is a complete picture of Hannah's relationship with Taton Dorfman. What we do know is that by late July 2024, that relationship was about to end in the most horrific way imaginable. Hannah Rogers deserved to live a full life. She deserved to grow old, to pursue her dreams, to laugh with friends and loved ones for decades to come. Instead, her story ends on a Sunday night in July, when the person who should have protected her became the person who took everything from her. Remember her name, Hannah Marie Rogers, not as a victim, but as a person whose life mattered. Let's walk through the timeline of that night, because understanding exactly how this unfolded is crucial to understanding the psychology of what happened. It's Sunday, July 28, 2024. Around 10:30 p.m., Marana Police Department received information that would launch them into a frantic response. Taton Dorfman's ex-girlfriend had contacted them with horrifying evidence. But let's back up. What led to that call? Dorfman had called his ex-girlfriend and told her he had killed his current girlfriend, Hannah Rogers, with a firearm. He also told her that Hannah's dog was dead next to them. Think about that for a moment, investigators. A man commits murder, and his first instinct isn't to call for help. It isn't to show remorse. It's to call his ex-girlfriend and brag about what he'd done. But Dorfman didn't stop with a phone call. During a FaceTime call, Dorfman showed his ex-girlfriend the scene of him laying next to Hannah's body, with blood around her head. The ex-girlfriend had the presence of mind to do something crucial. She screenshot the call and sent the pictures to officers. Those screenshots would become critical evidence in the case. During the call, Dorfman specifically said to his ex-girlfriend, "I killed her. I did it." This wasn't a moment of panic. This wasn't someone in shock accidentally admitting to something. This was a deliberate, boastful confession captured in real time through modern technology. Now here's a question that will become critical later in this case. Was this the act of a cold, calculated killer who planned Hannah's murder in advance? Or was this someone acting under the influence of substances, emotional chaos, and impulsive rage? Keep that question in mind as we move through the evidence, because it will determine everything about how justice is served. Marana Police Department responded to the home for a wellness check and were told Dorfman had firearms in the home. This immediately elevated the danger level. The Pima County Regional SWAT team was requested and set up containment on the residence. Now we have an active standoff situation. Inside that house, a confessed killer, multiple firearms, and the bodies of Hannah Rogers and her dog. While on the phone with officers, Dorfman said he killed Hannah and was going to kill himself. After about 5 hours of negotiations, Dorfman agreed to exit the home and was detained at approximately 3:30 a.m. on Monday morning. 5 hours. For 5 hours, police negotiators worked to get Dorfman out safely while Hannah's body lay inside. While her family had no idea what had happened. While that ex-girlfriend processed the horror of what she'd witnessed on her phone screen. When officers finally entered the home, they found exactly what they expected, but seeing it in person is always different from knowing intellectually what you're about to encounter. Hannah Rogers was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. A dog was also found dead with a gunshot wound. A handgun was found near the bed. The forensic picture was clear. This was a deliberate act. Hannah had been shot once in the head. Dorfman had also killed the dog next to them. Dorfman had blood on his hands and face. But here's a crucial detail. Investigators said Dorfman had blood on his hands and face but no injuries. This is important from a forensic standpoint. The blood on him wasn't from self-defense wounds. It wasn't from a struggle. It was transferred from being in close proximity to the victim after she was shot. But the FaceTime call wasn't the only digital evidence in this case. Dorfman also allegedly reached out to multiple people and posted on Facebook, claiming he was going to commit suicide. Think about that digital footprint. Investigators. In 2024, criminals often create their own evidence trail through social media, phone calls, and video chats. Where once detectives had to piece together evidence from witnesses and physical clues, now killers often document their own crimes. Officers also found a large amount of alcohol and drug paraphernalia in the home. This gives us insight into the environmental factors present that night, substance use that may have lowered inhibitions or altered decision-making. Remember that question about premeditation versus impulsive violence? These substances will play a role in that debate. When you have a confession, photographic evidence, and a crime scene that matches a confession, you might think the investigation is straightforward. And in many ways, it was. But prosecutors still needed to build an airtight case and answer a fundamental question. Did Dorfman plan to kill Hannah before that night, or did something trigger him in the moment? The answer would determine whether this was first-degree murder or something else entirely. The ex-girlfriend screenshots were crucial. They showed Dorfman lying next to Hannah's body, blood visible around Hannah's head, Dorfman's face during confession, and timestamps proving when the call occurred. This wasn't hearsay. This was documented evidence that Dorfman himself created, evidence that would streamline the prosecution and guarantee he faced justice. The crime scene itself told a clear story. Single gunshot wound to Hannah's head. Single gunshot wound to the dog. Handgun recovered near the bed. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle suggesting Hannah was taken by surprise. From a forensic perspective, this pointed to an execution-style killing. Hannah likely never saw it coming. But was this execution planned in advance, or did it happen in a moment of rage? Taton Dorfman appeared via computer for his arraignment on a charge of first-degree murder and animal cruelty. The judge appointed an attorney to represent Dorfman before entering not guilty pleas on his behalf. Despite his videotaped confession, Dorfman initially pleaded not guilty. This is actually a common legal strategy. It forces prosecutors to prove their case and leaves room for plea negotiations. But here's where this case gets interesting from an investigative standpoint. Police had to answer critical questions. Was this premeditated? Was there a history of domestic violence? What was Dorfman's mental state? Were there warning signs that were missed? And prosecutors had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Dorfman didn't just kill Hannah, but that he planned to do it ahead of time. Here's something that troubles me about this case, and it should trouble you too. Neighbors said they'd only been there maybe 2 to 4 months, didn't make any noise, and there were no arguments or fighting. They were pretty quiet neighbors. On the surface, this seems like a relationship without obvious warning signs. But domestic violence experts will tell you that's often when the danger is greatest. Many domestic violence situations don't involve constant, visible conflict. Sometimes, the most controlling relationships appear peaceful from the outside because a victim has been so thoroughly dominated that they stopped resisting. We don't have detailed information about the history of Hannah and Dorfman's relationship. We don't know if there were previous incidents, previous calls to police, or restraining orders. What we do know is that on July 28, 2024, something triggered Dorfman to take Hannah's life. Investigators, if you're finding this analysis helpful, make sure you're subscribed. We do deep dives like this every week, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Hit that bell icon for notifications. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the ex-girlfriend's role in this case. This woman received a horrifying FaceTime call and did exactly the right thing. She didn't panic and hang up. She documented what she was seeing. She immediately contacted police. She provided crucial evidence. She took screenshots and sent the pictures to officers. Her quick thinking provided irrefutable, real-time evidence that streamlined the prosecution and guaranteed Dorfman faced justice. Her actions were nothing short of heroic. But imagine the psychological trauma of witnessing something like that. Imagine seeing someone you once knew lying next to a woman he's just murdered, bragging about it. That ex-girlfriend will likely need therapy for years to process what she saw. The courage it took to stay on that call, to capture that evidence, to immediately contact authorities demonstrates extraordinary presence of mind under unimaginable circumstances. She will carry the weight of what she witnessed for the rest of her life, but her actions ensure that Hannah's killer could not escape accountability. The Taton Dorfman trial was set for April 22, 2025. The case moved through the justice system with the weight of overwhelming evidence behind it. Prosecutors had a confession, multiple confessions actually. They had video evidence of the confession. They had screenshot from the FaceTime call. They had crime scene evidence matching confession. They had forensic evidence. They had timeline evidence. They had witness testimony. This was, from a prosecutorial standpoint, about as strong a case as you can build. But the question remained, could they prove Dorfman planned Hannah's murder in advance? Or would the jury conclude this was a crime born of substance-fueled rage in the moment? A jury found Dorfman guilty of second-degree murder in September 2025. So here's the answer to that question we've been building toward. Second-degree murder. Let's talk about why that matters. Investigators. Dorfman was originally charged with first-degree murder. First-degree murder requires proof of premeditation, that the killer planned the murder in advance. Second-degree murder means the killing was intentional but not premeditated. The jury's decision suggests they believe Dorfman made a decision to kill Hannah in the moment, rather than planning it out ahead of time. The jury likely considered several factors in reaching this conclusion. The presence of alcohol and drugs in Dorfman's system. The lack of evidence showing he purchased a gun specifically for this purpose or made other preparations. The impulsive nature of immediately calling his ex-girlfriend rather than attempting to cover up the crime. The social media posts about suicide suggesting emotional chaos rather than cold calculation. Whether this conclusion is accurate or not, it has significant implications for sentencing. The judge said because of the circumstances of the case, the maximum sentence he was able to give was 16 years. On Monday, October 20th, 2025, Taton Michael Blade Dorfman was sentenced to 16 years in prison for killing Hannah Marie Rogers. At sentencing, Dorfman said in his statement to the court, "I'm not a killer. I'm not a murderer." Let that sink in, investigators. Despite confessing multiple times, Despite FaceTiming his ex-girlfriend while lying next to Hannah's body, despite being convicted by a jury, Dorfman still maintained he wasn't a murderer. This speaks to a profound disconnect from reality or a complete lack of accountability. Either way, it's chilling. But perhaps the most powerful moment at sentencing came from Hannah's family. Hannah's sister-in-law, Rochelle Fernandez-Rogers, said she forgives Dorfman and hopes he and his family can move forward.
And I don't think Hannah would want us to live that way.
She explained, "I just realized in my heart of hearts that if I didn't forgive him, if I didn't get to that level, it would just eat me alive from the inside out, and I don't want to live that way. And I don't think Hannah would want us to live that way." That level of grace in the face of such horror is extraordinary. Rochelle chose forgiveness not for Dorfman's benefit, but for her own healing and in honor of Hannah's memory. Hannah's family and friends have had to process this unimaginable loss. Someone described as beautiful, smart, and funny, who lit up rooms with her smile, taken at just 30 years old. 16 years. That's what Dorfman received. Hannah got a death sentence for the crime of being in a relationship with the wrong person. Let's analyze what makes this case particularly significant from a psychological standpoint. Dorfman's decision to FaceTime his ex-girlfriend immediately after the murder is extraordinarily telling. This isn't normal post-homicide behavior. Most killers either flee the scene, attempt to cover up the crime, call police, or harm themselves. But Dorfman did something different. He documented his crime and bragged about it. This behavior pattern suggests several possible psychological factors worth considering. First, potential narcissistic tendencies, the need to be seen even in his worst moment. Second, desire for attention, calling multiple people, posting on social media. Third, lack of impulse control, acting on emotion without considering consequences. And fourth, substance impairment. The alcohol and drugs found at the scene likely played a role in lowering his inhibitions and clouding his judgment. I want to be clear. These are analytical frameworks commonly used in forensic psychology, not definitive diagnoses. Without a formal psychiatric evaluation, we can observe patterns but cannot make clinical determinations. The fact that he called his ex-girlfriend specifically is also significant. Was he trying to hurt her? Make her jealous? Show her what she drove him to? We can't know his exact motivation, but it suggests the ex-girlfriend still held significant psychological importance to him. In cases involving individuals with narcissistic or antisocial personality traits, this type of call could serve multiple purposes. It could be an attempt to maintain control over someone who had left him. It could be a way to insert himself back into her life in the most dramatic way possible. It could be revenge for perceived abandonment. What we do know is that this wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional sense. Crimes of passion happen in the heat of the moment during a confrontation. But Dorfman's behavior after the murder, the calculated decision to call his ex, to show her what he'd done, to post on social media, to engage with multiple people, suggests a level of deliberation that contradicts the typical profile of someone who killed in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Yet the jury concluded it wasn't premeditated. This apparent contradiction highlights the complexity of human behavior and the challenges juries face in determining intent. This case represents a growing trend in 21st century crime, perpetrators creating their own evidence through technology. We've seen cases where killers live-stream their crimes, post confessions on social media, send photos to friends, or record their own murders on cell phones. Technology that was designed to connect us is being weaponized by those with violent intent. But paradoxically, that same technology also makes it easier to convict criminals. Dorfman's FaceTime call provided evidence that would have been impossible to obtain just 20 years ago. In the era before smartphones and social media, this case would have relied entirely on physical evidence and forensics. Police would have had to establish timeline, motive, opportunity. They would have had to rely on witness statements, phone records, and circumstantial evidence. But Dorfman handed them a confession on a silver platter, documented in real time, with visual evidence, with timestamps, with multiple witnesses. He essentially prosecuted himself. This raises interesting questions about the psychology of criminals in the digital age. Are killers becoming more reckless because they are so accustomed to documenting their lives online? Do they lack the impulse control to resist the urge to share even their worst moments? Or is there something deeper at play, a desire to be caught, to be punished, to have their actions acknowledged and validated even if that validation comes in the form of criminal prosecution? These are questions that forensic psychologists and criminologists are actively studying as technology continues to reshape criminal behavior. Hannah's death brings up crucial questions about domestic violence prevention. Warning signs that often appear before intimate partner homicide include isolation from friends and family, substance abuse, access to weapons, threats of suicide, previous violence or threats, controlling behavior, and extreme jealousy. The tragedy is that neighbors describe them as quiet with no visible signs of conflict. This reminds us that domestic violence often happens behind closed doors, making it crucial for all of us to be aware of subtle signs and to check in with loved ones. If someone in your life seems increasingly isolated, if their personality has changed, if they make excuses for bruises or avoid social situations, these could be red flags. Domestic violence doesn't always present itself in obvious ways. Sometimes the warning signs are subtle. A friend who stops going out as much. A family member who always has an excuse why their partner is controlling their schedule. Someone who seems anxious when their phone rings or when they receive text messages. Research shows that the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when they try to leave the relationship. That's when the abuser feels they're losing control, and when violence often escalates. We don't know the exact dynamics of Hannah and Dorfman's relationship, but we do know that whatever triggered this murder, it resulted in Hannah losing her life in her own home, a place that should have been her sanctuary. The presence of firearms in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. This statistic isn't just a number. It represents real lives, real women like Hannah who died because someone with violent tendencies had access to a weapon. The combination of domestic violence, substance abuse, and firearms is particularly lethal. When you add in the element of someone posting suicidal threats on social media, you have a perfect storm of risk factors that should trigger immediate intervention. But the challenge is that many of these risk factors only become clear in hindsight. Neighbors didn't hear fighting. Friends and family may not have known about problems in the relationship. By the time police were called, it was already too late for Hannah. This is why domestic violence education is so critical. The more people understand about warning signs, about risk factors, about resources available to victims, the more likely we are to intervene before tragedies occur. The animal cruelty charge in this case is also significant. Dorfman didn't just kill Hannah, he also killed her dog. Research has consistently shown a strong correlation between animal abuse and violence against humans. People who harm animals are statistically more likely to harm people. In domestic violence situations, abusers often target pets as a way to control, intimidate, or punish their partners. They know that many victims will endure abuse themselves rather than leave a beloved pet in danger. The fact that Dorfman killed Hannah's dog suggests several things. It could have been an act of rage against everything Hannah loved. It could have been a way to hurt her as completely as possible. It could have been an attempt to eliminate any living witness. Or it could simply reflect a fundamental lack of empathy and disregard for life, whether human or animal. Whatever his motivation, the killing of the dog demonstrates the depth of violence and cruelty he was capable of that night. From a legal standpoint, the animal cruelty charge also allowed prosecutors to paint a fuller picture of Dorfman's actions and state of mind. It showed a pattern of violence, not just a single tragic moment. It demonstrated callousness and intentionality. These elements helped the jury understand the full scope of what happened in that home on July 28, 2024. The 5-hour standoff between police and Dorfman also reveals important information about his psychological state. He had already confessed to multiple people. He had already documented the crime. He had posted on social media about suicide. Yet when police arrived, he didn't immediately surrender. He didn't harm himself as he'd threatened. Instead, he engaged in a 5-hour negotiation. This suggests he was having second thoughts about dying, or perhaps he wanted to control the situation just a little bit longer, to remain the center of attention, to dictate the terms of his surrender. Police negotiators are trained to keep suspects talking, to build rapport, to find leverage. In this case, they successfully convinced Dorfman to surrender peacefully at 3:30 a.m. This was the best possible outcome for everyone involved. No officers were harmed. Dorfman was taken into custody alive. The crime scene was preserved. Justice would be possible because the perpetrator survived to face trial. But we have to acknowledge the trauma experienced by everyone involved in this case. The ex-girlfriend who received that horrifying FaceTime call. the police officers who entered that home and saw Hannah's body and her dog, the neighbors who woke up to police lights and SWAT teams surrounding a house on their quiet street, the emergency dispatchers who took those initial calls, the forensic investigators who processed the scene, the prosecutors who had to review the evidence, including those screenshots and videos, the jury members who had to look at that evidence and decide Dorfman's fate, the judge who had to hand down a sentence knowing it would never be enough, and of course, Hannah's family and friends, the people who loved her, who are now left with a void that can never be filled. They have to live with the knowledge of how she died, of how preventable it might have been, of how a person they may have met and trusted turned out to be capable of such violence. They have to navigate grief, anger, trauma, and loss while also participating in a legal process that moves slowly and doesn't always feel like justice. Rochelle Fernandez-Rogers' statement about forgiveness is particularly powerful in this context. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It's not about excusing what happened. It's not about saying the crime doesn't matter. It's not about letting the perpetrator off the hook. Forgiveness is about releasing the hold that anger and hatred have on the victim's loved ones. It's about choosing not to let the perpetrator continue to victimize them through bitterness and rage. It's about honoring the victim's memory by living a full life rather than being consumed by what was taken. Hannah's family could have chosen a different path. They could have filled their victim impact statements with rage and demands for the harshest possible punishment. No one would have blamed them. But instead, they chose grace. They chose healing. They chose to remember Hannah as she lived, not just how she died. That doesn't mean they don't hurt. It doesn't mean they think 16 years is adequate justice. It means they found a way to move forward despite the unimaginable loss they've suffered. The disparity between the original charge of first-degree murder and the eventual conviction for second-degree murder is worth examining more closely. Prosecutors originally believed they could prove premeditation. They believed the evidence would show Dorfman planned to kill Hannah in advance. But the jury disagreed. The jury concluded that while Dorfman intentionally killed Hannah, he didn't plan it ahead of time. This distinction matters enormously in sentencing. First-degree murder in Arizona can carry a life sentence. Second-degree murder has a much lower sentencing range. The judge stated that 16 years was a maximum sentence allowed given the conviction. Some might see this as inadequate. Hannah's life was worth more than 16 years. But within the framework of the law, given the jury's verdict, the judge's hands were tied. This is a reality of the justice system. It's not perfect. It doesn't always feel like justice, but it operates within defined legal parameters. What could have led the jury to conclude the murder wasn't premeditated? Perhaps they believed the substance abuse impaired Dorfman's ability to plan. Perhaps they thought the murder happened during an argument that escalated suddenly. Perhaps they gave way to the fact that Dorfman immediately confessed rather than trying to cover up the crime, suggesting it wasn't carefully planned. We can't know the jury's exact reasoning, but their verdict reflects their interpretation of the evidence and the law. This case also highlights the critical importance of witnesses who act decisively in crisis situations. The ex-girlfriend's testimony and evidence were not just helpful, they were foundational to the prosecution. Without her screenshots, without her immediate call to police, the case might have unfolded very differently. Dorfman could have had time to construct a defense, to claim self-defense or accident, to dispose of evidence or alter the scene. But because his ex-girlfriend acted so quickly and so courageously, that wasn't possible. She created a digital record that couldn't be disputed or explained away, evidence that guaranteed swift justice. So investigators, what can you take away from Hannah Rogers' story? I want you to really think about this. How many people in your life might be suffering in silence? How many quiet neighbors might actually be in danger? We live in a world where it's easy to mind our own business, to assume everything is fine if we don't hear fighting through the walls. But Hannah's case shows us that silence doesn't mean safety. Together, we need to create communities where people feel safe asking for help, where warning signs are taken seriously, where we check in on each other. As someone who studies these cases, I can tell you that most intimate partner homicides have warning signs. They are often subtle, sometimes invisible to outsiders. But they are there. My goal in covering cases like this isn't to sensationalize tragedy. It's to educate all of us on what to look for and how to help. So let's honor Hannah's memory by doing better, by paying attention, by believing victims when they tell us something's wrong, by understanding that domestic violence doesn't always look like what we see in movies. Here's what I want you to do. First, if you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7. Second, share this video. The more people who understand these warning signs, the more lives we can save. Hannah Marie Rogers should be alive today. She should be living her life, loving her dog, spending time with her family. Instead, her life ended at 30 years old because someone who claimed to care about her made the choice to take everything from her. Here's my question for you, and I want you to answer in the pinned comment below. If a friend told you they were worried about their partner, but then said everything's fine the next day, what would you do? Would you let it go, or would you keep checking in? There's no wrong answer. I want to hear your thoughts. If this is your first time watching one of my investigations, welcome to the Investigation Squad. Hit that subscribe button because we cover cases like this every week, with respect, with research, and with the goal of understanding how to prevent future tragedies. And if you want to support deeper investigations like this, check out my Patreon where you get early access to videos, exclusive content, and the chance to suggest cases you want me to cover. Resources you need to know about. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 988. RAIN Sexual Assault Hotline, 1-800-656-4673. These numbers save lives. Keep them handy. Share them with anyone who might need them. Justice delayed is not justice denied. I'll see you in the next investigation, investigators.